I was sitting at the kitchen table enjoying a bowl of granola when I was surprised by a sharp knock on my kitchen door. Pondering who it was that would be knocking at 8 under on a Sunday morning, I strode across the tile floor and opened the door. Standing on my porch was a man in his mid-40s wearing a cheap crumpled suit. Behind him stood 3 uniformed police officers. This was definitely not a normal Sunday routine. "Mr. Young," the suit asked, waving his back, "do you mind if we come in and ask you a few questions? I'm afraid I can only talk to one person at a time." "Detective, what was your name again?" I asked. "Cook, Detective Richard Cook." "I'll be asking the questions, Mr. Young. These men would like to inspect your home if you don't mind," the detective added. "Do you have a warrant?" "I've seen enough cop shows to know that you need a warrant to break into my house to look around, as you put it," I stated. "No, sir, we don't have a warrant. I'm asking for permission for these officers to look around your house." "You have the right to deny my request. Then I'll have to get a warrant," the detective agreed. I really couldn't remember what I would have to hide, but I didn't know what they were looking for. Illegal porn on my laptop doesn't ring a bell. Couple of dead bodies in the freezer, probably still unlikely. Write a couple of illegally copied DVDs. "You're not Interpol, are you?" I asked quickly. "No, Mr. Young, believe me, we're not interested in illegally copied movies. Everyone's always worried about that," the detective admitted, shaking his head slowly. "Would you mind telling me what this is about then?" I asked politely. "Quite unusual for this neighborhood. Why do you want to search my house, sir?" "There's been a murder, and I'm investigating it. These officers are helping me." "Is there a reason you want to deny my request?" Detective Cook asked. "Well, yes, because I can. Because I don't want a bunch of strangers wandering around my house. Because the floors are clean, and I want them to stay that way. Or my wife will give me hell when she wakes up," I replied. "Is that reason enough?" "How about I drag your ass down to the station and interrogate you for 5 or 6 hours while my colleagues get a search warrant and go through your clean house with a fine-toothed comb?" Cook growled. "You gentlemen can go in and look around while I entertain Detective Cook," I said, addressing the 3 uniformed police officers. I wasn't sure why the cops were so eager to search my house, but I was pretty sure they wouldn't find anything horrible. Except maybe those damn tags the kids had ripped off their mattresses and carried past the cash register 15 years ago. If tensions escalated, Cook could go to Penn State and arrest both of my sons at one time. I had no tongue to warn them about the illegality of removing those damned labels. I pointed to Cook's chair as 3 uniformed men entered the kitchen. I watched as they slowed down and stopped at the island in the center of the room. They turned almost simultaneously to look in my direction. "Only one at a time," I muttered, as this holy trinity dived into my box of fresh donuts. I had bought a dozen jelly donuts minutes before they arrived, and their aroma triggered their professional instincts. At that moment, my wife June entered the kitchen, treading carefully, holding the collar of her robe tightly to her throat. "Steve, what's going on? Why are police officers walking around our house eating donuts? Is something wrong?" she asked worriedly. "June, this is Detective Cook. I hope he will enlighten us about the situation by asking his questions." I allowed them to look around, which was the euphemism Cook called the action, I explained. "Detective, this is my wife, June." "Why don't you tell us why you're here investigating a murder?" I prompted. "Mr. Robert Morgan was shot and killed last night around midnight. I suppose you both knew him well?" Cook inquired. "Yes, he was June's boss. You must have no shortage of suspects, Cook. That bastard was making cuckolds faster than rabbits breed. You should be looking for a jealous husband, maybe even a whole platoon." I grinned, feeling no sadness at all over the death of my wife's late employer. No one else even smiled. June's face turned whiter than I'd ever seen it, and tears came to her eyes. Cook only nodded slightly, studying my face. Except for June's quiet sobs, the room was dead silent. "Mrs. Young, how long have you been having an affair with your employer, Robert Morgan?" the detective asked. "I didn't really have an affair with him. I mean, really," June sobbed. "It was more of a chance encounter. I wasn't in love with him or anything. We first met probably about 6 months ago. I would never shoot anyone, much less Bob," June replied, albeit with less conviction than I would have liked from my wife. "Really?" grumbled the detective. "Mr. Young, how would you answer the same questions?" They started sleeping with each other on August 9th of this year, I answered calmly. It was after a dinner party at the Morgans. I'd been called in early because of work problems. He offered June a ride home and slept with her in the back seat of his SUV. I'm not upset because June and I have an unspoken agreement. Simply put, we can sleep with whoever we want, and we do. My revelation made June's mouth drop almost to the floor. It took her a few seconds to process all the information I had just dumped on the detective. I could see the wheels in her head turning very slowly. How come I've never heard of this so-called agreement? June asked indignantly. Because that's what the word unspoken means, dear, I replied quickly. If we were discussing it, I would say that you and I had a verbal agreement, and if we signed and notarized it, it would be a written agreement. Our agreement was unspoken. Well, it would have been nice if I had known about it, June said. I've tried awfully hard not to let you know about Bob. I think from now on, all our agreements should be verbalized or even documented. This wading through crap is getting on my nerves. The answer to that question doesn't strike me as comprehensive, Cook admitted, reaching into his shirt pocket and pulling out a small tape recorder. You both should know that I record everything you say. Mrs. Young, did you date other gentlemen, or was Mr. Morgan your only lover? Cook asked. Of course he was, June protested, perhaps overemphasized. I am a married woman. How can you even ask me such questions? As far as you know, your husband took advantage of this unspoken agreement, or was completely faithful to you? Cook asked. Steve would never break our marriage vows, Detective, June replied somewhat indignantly. He's as faithful as an old dog. You can have that on record, Mr. Young. I'm asking you the same questions again. Do you agree with your wife's answers? Cook prompted. June has been sleeping with her colleague, Bill Anderson, since September 15th, not counting the time with those two aforementioned. She's as loyal to me as that damn geyser that proudly bears that name in one of our national parks, I answered without emotion. June let out a barely audible sigh. You seem like a remarkably well-informed husband, and even more surprising is your lack of emotion, the detective remarked. Many men would be angry, and consider murder if they knew their wife was entertaining two lovers. Why are you so calm about all this, Mr. Young? Like I said, we have an unspoken agreement. June did it practically out in the open, but I was more restrained, if you know what I mean. I smirked shyly. It seemed like June was about to have a stroke. Her eyes had stopped shedding tears. Now they were just popping out of their orbits. Her face was now bright crimson rather than white, and she was crushing a jelly donut with her left hand. The jelly seeped through her fingers and dripped all over her robe, though she didn't even seem to notice it. In other words, are you saying you had a mistress too? Demanded an answer from the astonished detective. And it seems that your wife didn't know about it. Who was your affair with, and when did it begin, Mr. Young? You're very perceptive. No wonder you became a detective before you were 50, I replied wryly. I first made love to Janet Morgan on August 11th, 2 days after her husband slept with June in the back seat of his car. We've managed to do it almost every weekday since then, I fondly recalled. In shock, June brought her hand up to her temple. The action caused the jelly that had been in her hand to settle on her forehead. She didn't seem to notice, and Cook was too polite to get her attention, especially since he was struggling to form a coherent sentence. Good God, you slept with the widow of a murder victim, he exclaimed. I interviewed her briefly last night, and she didn't mention your name once. Is there any chance you're mistaken or trying to make a joke? You want to hear her mention my name, Cook? Hide in her bedroom closet the next time I cover her, and you'll hear her call my name. Of course I'm not wrong. I distinctly remember the names of all the women I make love to, damn it, I stated emphatically. You said you sleep with women, plural, Mr. Young. Do you have more than one mistress? Now that you ask, I must admit that I've been doing the Mambo o Cuban dance with a distinct rhythm, horizontal style, with Lisa Anderson since mid-September. We dance several times every weekend and sometimes even during the week, I answered. Jelly was now flowing unimpeded down June's face as she collapsed into a chair in a near-coma state. Cook was swallowing some kind of small pill. It appeared to be nitroglycerin, a pill for heart disease that my Uncle Phil used from time to time. After taking a moment to collect himself, Cook rushed forward. Mr. Young, you must understand that you are having affairs with the wives of two men who are sleeping with your wife. May I suggest that this is not a coincidence? Revenge is having the wives of your wife's lovers. Sweet revenge is even sweeter, and I've been lucky enough to experience that incredible high, I replied with obvious pleasure. You mean you killed Robert Morgan to avenge his affair with your wife? Hell, you brutalized his wife every goddamn weekday. Isn't that enough for you? Cook demanded an answer. The answer to both of your questions is an emphatic no. In due time, you will realize my ultimate revenge, I promised. What the hell questions did you just answer no to? The puzzled detective asked, fiddling with his tape recorder to replay his earlier questions. So, are you saying you didn't kill Robert Morgan? Or are you saying he wasn't killed for revenge? Cook asked after hearing his own questions. I can answer yes to both of those questions, I answered. Damn it, roared Cook. I must remember to ask one question at a time. It was at that moment that one of the uniformed police officers brought a large pistol into the kitchen and waved it in front of Detective Cook's incredulous eyes. I found this in the gun cabinet in the basement, the officer glowered. You want to mark it as evidence and admit it? That's an excellent idea, Cook exclaimed. Be sure to have it fingerprinted at the lab. The owner of those prints is either a cold-blooded killer or the dumbest son of a bitch in the world. The cop blushed slightly as he walked out the door, holding my .44 Magnum in one hand and my donuts in the other. It's starting to trickle down pretty good. The detective grinned, watching the strawberry filling drip from the tip of June's nose onto the kitchen table near the box of donuts. No pun intended. Morgan was shot with a .44 caliber Magnum pistol. Do you own one of those guns, Mr. Young? I saw a .44 Magnum on Bill Anderson one night. It got me thinking. As you well know, jealous husbands can be bastards and murderers. I realized that I needed a gun as good as Bill's in case he came after me in a rage. Not all men are as understanding as I am, so I went out and bought one. We've got the motive and the gun, Cook smiled. Now all we need is opportunity. I suppose you spent a quiet evening at home with your wife? Actually, I spent most of the evening inside Lisa Anderson and in her marital bed, to be exact. I left at 11:12 sharp and came home immediately. June was asleep when I got here. I'm not sure Lisa can remember the time since she was quite drunk when I left, I added. It's certainly convenient you remember the exact time you left, but Mrs. Anderson was too distracted to remember anything. And your wife was asleep when you got home. I am almost afraid to ask, but how did you remember the exact time when you left the Anderson residence? Cook inquired. Her husband left a message on the answering machine while I was tormenting his wife's flesh. He said he was on his way home from the airport. It was 10:12. I knew the best he could do to get home was an hour, so I did my best to leave before 11:12. I met his car driving through their neighborhood as I was heading home, I said. Even if you left at 11:12, as you claim, you had plenty of time to get to Morgan's house and shoot him when he opened the door. I think we have enough evidence to arrest you for murder, Mr. Young, the very satisfied detective stated. He was already reaching for his handcuffs when his cell phone rang. Cook gestured for one of his damn boys to follow me when he went outside to keep the conversation confidential. He was gone for almost 10 minutes. The look on his face when he returned told me everything. Damn Detective Burns just got a full confession from Bill Anderson. He claims he came home from the airport and found his wife dead drunk. He exploded when he noticed a wallet on the floor next to his passed-out wife. It was Robert Morgan's wallet, so he dragged his gun to Morgan's place and put a hole in it that a cat could be pushed through. He tried to deny it first, but broke down under Burns's questioning. Do you have any idea how Robert Morgan's wallet ended up on Anderson's bedroom floor? Cook asked. I have no idea, Cook, I answered quietly. He often left it on the nightstand by his bed. I noticed it several times when I slept with his wife. Why he or anyone else would mistakenly leave it at the Anderson house is a complete mystery to me. It looks like one of your wife's lovers is going to jail for a very long time for killing her other lover. All this time, you had their wives far more often than they had yours, even though there were 2 of them. Now your wife is sitting here in some kind of trance with her head down in a box of goddamn jelly donuts. It's sweeter that way, was my only answer.